see what we can learn from the numbers. And my name is Dave Woodward. I am the founder and president of Forefront, and I'm joined here with by Tamara Mack. Tamara, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, Tamara Mack. I lead communications. I'll be sending that follow-up link to today's recording for all of those who couldn't join or all of those who wanted a second look at today's presentation.
All right. And thanks again to all of you who are joining from across the country here today to take a look at this together. We're going to run this, kind of going through the session today, and make sure that that we're going to be recorded. And I like it when people send their questions through chat at any time. As the question comes to you, go ahead and put that question into the chat, and then I'll make sure to pause at various times throughout the presentation to answer those and dig deeper as necessary to kind of think about these things as you will, and think about what's going on. So just a little bit first about the Forefront Global Cohort, the USNS, that Universal Screeners for Number Sense Global Cohort. So we get data. So when people put the results for any assessment into Forefront, we are able to aggregate that information and de-identify it and create constantly growing aggregate groups for the assessments that we support. Right now, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 plus different districts in different states that are contributing. We don't know exactly who they are because it is an aggregated and de-identified group of students and student results. So we have more than 20 states and we have international schools. We are confident of that. Forefront allows you to do both local and global norms. Just so you know, we are going to be only looking at the global norms. The reports that I'm going to be sharing with us today are also available at the local level for those who are using Forefront. And eventually, actually, it's not going to happen today, but by the end of the summer, we're hoping that we will be able to share all of the reports kind of as a template with our districts who use these, so that if you want to put your local results directly next to those global norms, you would be able to. You could currently build them in Forefront, but just to be able to, for convenience sakes, we'll be able to share those directly into your catalogs. One of the things that you're going to notice here today is that this number is continually growing. And from this most recent cohort that we're going to be looking at most deeply today, it's more than doubled from last year, and you're going to see that in the results here in this first report that I show. These are the current state of the USNS Global cohort that we have in terms of numbers of student results for the different questions on the assessment. So you can see that we've got some grade levels more than 4,000. They hover around 2,000, 3,000 in most grade levels. Sixth grade was our first year with the sixth grade assessments, and so those numbers are quite a bit smaller. One thing that we noticed looking at this is that over the years these numbers have really flattened out. We used to have a lot more in the fall. The fall is still the biggest number of results, but we're getting results across the mid-year and the spring now. So that's wonderful for those of us who are trying to use the USNS kind of as not just a screening assessment, but also as kind of a progress monitoring assessment, almost like an interim assessment. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and hop in right now. So I've spent the last couple of days creating these reports, and hold on here. I want to go out for just a second here so that I can focus in and make sure that our view is good for everyone. Sorry, I'm getting some new functionality here that I'm still needing to learn how to use well. Sorry. So I will be doing this like that. And now we're zoomed in. Perfect. So what we are looking at here now is the current year results. This is actually the fall assessment that we're looking at here. And the results for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. I can add in sixth grade here too, if we'd like to, and see what those results look like. And there's definitely a trend there that you're noticing, I'm sure. And that is that, that once we hit third grade, the assessments appear to get much more difficult. Now, why we get these results every year is kind of hard to say. It could be that might be a little bit of kind of selection bias as it is. Maybe people are only giving these to selected students. We think that we have a pretty universal screener here, and we have seen these on purely universal implementations before. And my interpretation of this is just that the fall screeners for third, fourth, and fifth grade, that as the demands of the curriculum, as the demands of the standards become more rigorous and difficult, it's harder for kids to keep up. And so even though these are tied strongly to expectations that are defined in standards, both in the Common Core and across different states, those expectations are harder and harder for students to meet. So what I'd like to do now is to help us to understand how these results compare to prior year's results. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on last year's results to get that comparative group. And I'm going to turn off sixth grade for right now because we didn't really have last year's results for sixth grade. So now we're looking at kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And what comes out of this, you'll notice, is that in fact, kindergarten, first grade, each and every grade, these overall results for each of the grade levels has gotten slightly better as compared to last year. So this recovery from the pandemic seems to be in progress here. We're going to take a much more detailed look at this in just a few minutes here, but we could definitely see that there are more students that are performing at that proficient level across each of the grade levels. And one thing I do like to point out in terms of the design of the screeners is that you will notice that it's predominantly green, that is at the proficient level for most of these assessments. And that is because these screeners are designed to be only identifying those students who really we recognize are at risk. So one of the things I look for in these data is I sort of think about that RTI triangle and that group at the top that should be a very small group at the top of the triangle, maybe the top 5% or the bottom 5% to the bottom 10%. And the numbers kind of roll out in that way. So a very small number of students who are needing tier 3 and tier 2 interventions coming in at the orange and yellow, and then predominantly the students who are performing at tier 1 and need only tier 1 supports for their instruction. I'm going to go ahead now and turn on the global cohort from 20 to 21, and actually I'm going to go ahead and turn off the current year now, so that we can kind of flash back to last year, if you will. So last year, this is what we saw. So those fall results from 2020, when we were just kind of experiencing the beginning of the pandemic, and then compared to 2021 in that fall, we saw pretty dramatic drops across all of the grade levels. And so now when we line that up with the current year, you'll see that yeah, we're improving, but we're not back to where we were with that fall cohort from 2020. Now, once again, this is not a matched cohort as such, and we know that there's a lot more students in the current group of students in the current global cohort. And so it's kind of hard to call this an apple-to-apple comparison. Nevertheless, it does look like we are headed in the right direction in terms of the recovery. So we're very happy to see those results. I'm going to go ahead and turn on now the mid-year and spring results for each of the grade levels. Actually, I'll go ahead and turn off these other grade levels before this gets too crowded. So now as I turn on our mid-year and spring results for each of these grade levels, we can see the larger trend. And just a couple more clicks here. And I'm just going to do K5 for now. And you'll see that, we've got kind of this general downward trend, I'm going to call this, because the green is getting smaller and the yellow and red are getting bigger, which is not what we were hoping for, right? And now I'm going to go ahead and turn on last year's global again. So on the fall assessments, we saw improvements across each of the assessments K5. Now, when I turn on this from last year and compare to the mid-year and spring as well. So here we have fall kinder, mid-year kinder, and spring kinder, and we see improvements across all three. Fall, mid-year, spring of first grade, overall results show improvements across all three of those cohorts. Fall, second grade now, fall, mid-year, and spring, we see improvements across all three of the assessments. And now we get to third grade and we see fall, mid-year, spring, and in the mid-year and spring results, we actually see drops again. So there's this drop off between in our mid-year and spring that starts with our third grade students, fourth grade, fall, mid-year, spring, and fourth grade fall, we see a drop as well. And then we see a drop in the mid-year spring or in the mid-year for fifth grade also, which is kind of interesting that we're seeing these improvements in the lower grade levels that are not yet appearing across the board in the intermediate grade levels, the third through fifth grade students. So certainly we're going to dive deeper into this idea here in the conversation today and kind of look in detail at those results. But one of the things that, you know, I'm seeing in the media and kind of hearing in discussions is this idea that those third graders who are currently, you know, finishing their third grade year, really kind of, that was their kindergarten year that hit where the pandemic first hit. So they were kindergarten at the beginning of the pandemic, and then you know, in that March of the pandemic, and maybe perhaps that has something to do with the results that we're seeing here. So once again, I encourage you to put your questions or comments or noticings and wonderings into the chat as we go along here. As I start to transition now to digging a little bit deeper, somebody might have something that they're noticing and kind of wondering about here within this these results so far. Tamara, has anything hopped out yet?
No, I mean, I would be interested for those educators that have joined us today, if this kind of aligns with the experiences that you've had in your own classrooms, schools, and districts, that you're noticing these same challenges around the same grade levels, or if this is surprising. Yeah.
It certainly was surprising to me, you know, and I don't know what to attribute this improvement here in fifth grade. I think it might just because we just got a much larger group of students who joined in to join that fifth grade cohort, and so it's kind of hard to say, but interesting there as well. Okay, well, I'm going to turn now to take a little bit more of a deeper dive, and it's going to ask me if I need to save, and I'm going to say no, I do not need to save. So I've created a lot of reports. We will not be going into all of these reports today, but I have a whole lot of them here. So I'm going to start with that kindergarten fall, because I think it's interesting to see these results across the questions for those 3 years. So one of the things that we noticed last year, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this year's results, just to remind us once again of last year. So drops across the board. So if this is 2020 and then this is 2021 here side by side, you can see that every question across this assessment, perhaps not so much on question 3 here, but we saw these drops in performance very consistently. And where we saw last year the most significant drop, and this is true across I believe all of the grade levels, maybe with the exception of one grade level, I can't remember right now, is in this idea of reading numerals. So this reading numerals to 10 took a really significant hit last year at the beginning of the pandemic. So in comparison now, let's go ahead and turn on the current year results. And now we can see we've got some improvement that's happened across all of the questions, again, in terms of these first verbal ones. So the count to 10, the numeral reading, and then this ability of one-to-one correspondence and counting 7 things. We see some improvement there. The trickier ones here, and if you're familiar with the kindergarten task, I'll kind of walk this through. What we do is we then take those 7 things that they just counted and simply spin the plate with them watching and ask them if they how many there are now. This group in the yellow here are those who counted again. So interesting that this is just very stable here between the 2 years in the cohort of those students who are needing to still continue to count that one more time. And then for question 5 here, we take those 7 and we add 3 more there. And that yellow group, once again, they count all of them again. So they've counted the 7 now twice, and they're going to count that 7 one more time, and then all the way up to get to the 10. The green group simply says, oh, it's 8, 9, 10. And without needing to recount the 7 again is the thing there. And then this one, once again, completely static on the subitizing, which I find rather interesting, and static on the fingers, and then the overall just with that very, very slight improvement there. So in terms of these verbal tasks, it looks like we're making a rebound. In fact, this one-to-one correspondence seems to be even improving over time. But at the same time, not quite back to where we would want to be. Of course, we would love to have all students coming into kindergarten reading the numerals to 10, but no, we're probably not going to get there. And then here, I think this is always interesting that at 4.7, so about 5% of students, and this has been a number we've been collecting data in Forefront for many years, and I don't have the really old data, but this idea that about 5% of students come into kindergarten unable to count to 10 has been a very consistent number over time, pandemic, no pandemic. So let's go ahead and move on to first grade.
I did just want to say one thing to all of our participants today. When you do drop something into the chat, you do have the option to share that with just David and myself, or you can share that with everyone. So if you're comfortable with having that message or that chat script be shared on the recording afterwards with other registrants for today, please do drop that into everyone. If you do just intend to share that with David and myself, you can also just share that with David and myself. So I was just going to share back out that some noticing that there is some alignment, especially around 3rd grade, questions around just the timing too of state testing and test fatigue, and if that's also influencing kind of that decline in those results for 3rd and 4th grade that you're noticing.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that. So here we're looking at first grade. The first task generally on all of the assessments, if you're not familiar with them, are always the counting tasks. And then this is another counting task, and then the count by tens and numeral ID. Once again, we're seeing improvements across all of those tasks, and then once again, the one-to-one correspondence is looking good here. The stable one here, and this did not take even a hit during the pandemic, is this 8-2. It's one of the most difficult tasks on the first grade fall assessment. And it's just stayed rock solid through the pandemic and over time, even from before the pandemic. So an interesting one there. I find this interesting that we had a pretty significant drop during the pandemic on question number 10, where we have 10 things. And we show that to them with 10 frame on the table, and then I'm going to put 3 more. And how many are they're all together? That one really didn't see any improvement here, and so it's kind of an interesting kind of area that this is so the fall assessments for each of the grades are aligned with the end of year expectations from the prior year, from first grade through 5th grade and 6th grade, and so recognizing that this is one of those areas in kindergarten that's still kind of tricky for the students when they come into first grade. This idea of 10 ones and some more ones, as they put it in most of the standards that I read. So kind of an interesting one there. Once again, the yellow ones would be those students who count all 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, to get to it that way, rather than just seeing 10 and then 3 more ones. Okay, moving on to 2nd grade, we're going to see a very similar pattern here in the fall results. So improvements across the verbal tasks, awesome. And really across the board in 2nd grade, things are looking pretty darn good in terms of this rebound from the 2020 results and 2021 results across the board. So good news in second grade. Third grade, moving right along. This is the overall results. You can see that slight improvement there. I'm going to go ahead and take this over here to show you how our new reporting suite works with being able to change to different views. What I'm going to change this to now is our question analysis view to see the question by question results. And this one is kind of interesting because this is a count back task here, and we really don't see much improvement there at all. The numeral ID sees a little bit of improvement. This one here also, number 6, 45 plus 19 as a mental math task is not rebounding as quickly as we probably would want it to. And obviously we'd love to see more significant improvements for all students for some of these tasks, like the 50 minus 24 in a mental task. Question 9 here, in terms of like two numbers that go together to make 13, actually we'd probably want to call that static at this point in time. It'll be interesting to watch that one next year as well. So that's the second grade. I'm going to hop on to third grade now. Grade 3 fall. There we go. Take that and put that into our question analysis. Anything hop out there for you, Tamara?
Just some questions again to us. I'm just responding to those in chat, so nothing for the wider group.
All right. Interesting on this one. We just saw this in second grade, the count back. Third grade, very, very similar, just kind of static, not moving at all. Question 5 is also static here, counting back again by tens. So these kinds of things. And this is, when I think about these tasks, I'm thinking about those routines that teachers build in their classroom, counting routines that they build into their everyday instruction. That's what's really going to make an impact on this. We know that those routines kind of disappeared largely in the way that we used to do them in our classrooms before the pandemic. During the pandemic, when people were attempting to do everything remotely, it's very difficult to get those counting routines going in the same way that you can in the classroom, where you can hear everybody counting and see their lips all simultaneously and all this. So that's something that I really hope that we'll be able to really focus on now that we're back in our classrooms. Question 6, 45 plus 19, really kind of stable there. Okay, so back to grade 4. Looking at that pandemic bump in each of these questions, except for this one, which is a place value question here on 82 pencils. How many boxes can I fill with 10 pencils in each? And then very static across these here. 400 minus 198, one of the most difficult questions on the assessment. And then question number 9, the most difficult question on the 4th grade assessment in the fall, still showing that students really struggle with placing fractions onto number lines. That's just something that's been a persistent trouble for incoming 4th graders since the beginning of these assessments, and something that I hope we'll figure out how to really support our students better in doing. Okay. Yeah.
One question here before you move on, David, and you did kind of touch on this a little bit where you were talking about the overall results and kind of how that 10 to 15% can match with those tier 2, tier 3 kids. But what should schools expect to see when they're looking at those overall results for the beginning of year, middle of year, end of year assessments? Like, what percentage of kids, just generally as a rule of thumb, would you expect to see in the red, and which percentage should you expect to see proficient?
Yeah, I mean, it really does vary from grade level to grade level, as we're seeing. I mean, obviously there's more struggles here in 4th grade with that curriculum that came through from 3rd grade. And so it's difficult to say across the board how that is. So in this case, we're looking at that, once again, that most critical is 5% here. for the current year. And then we've got kind of the 5 to 10%, really is more like 13 is how it comes out in the fourth grade one. And then the 29% who probably just need some differentiated instruction. My looking at that overall, I think that we can say, okay, those 152 students in that group that are that bottom 5%, we probably want to do some quick intervention type things. Further diagnostic assessments would be good. Finding the assets that the child really does have, where they do understand, and where is the extent of the knowledge and the skills that child has. I think definitely for sure. However, there are other areas, and I think that this is where it really starts to make sense. If I'm looking at a class of students who are not able to put these fractions, 1/3 and 2/3, onto a number line, in the context of a race, right? And we're looking at 63% of students across the country who are unable to do that. That for me now is a tier 1 issue. That's where I feel like we need to do whole class reteaching, probably in this case, to ensure that those students have those fundamental ideas about fractions before we move further with fractions in fourth grade. And I would say probably the same might be true in terms of our indicator here with this mental math subtraction problem on question 8, where you might want to think about, okay, really whole class, we need to do more number talks and maybe more number strings and things like this to really build the conceptual understanding that will help them. When I'm thinking about other questions like question number 1, where we're looking at 10% of students unable to count from 995 to 1,000, that to me looks like a small group intervention that can be rectified in that situation. But probably you'll want to do some further assessments before you really dive in on that. So I think it changes from question to question. I think that the question is sort of one that you could say, okay, I've got my alarm bells going off when I'm looking at that overall being as low as it is. That means that child has struggled with every question across the entire assessment, and now I need to do some further assessment with that kid. And then there's other things that are more specific in terms of what the actual content is and how to serve the students who are struggling with the different ideas. So I don't like to throw the basket too large when really you've got whole class kinds of issues that need to be addressed. Okay, moving on to grade 5 for the mid-year, and taking a look at my clock as we go through here, for the fall. Sorry, this is the fall assessment from 5th grade. And once again, you got that pandemic bump across almost all of these questions, I believe. In fact, really, we see the pandemic bump across all of the questions on the 5th grade fall assessment. And so that's, it's just something that we're recovering from. We're just not quite back to where we were before the pandemic, equal with that pre-pandemic cohort. And hopefully this will continue to improve over time. Okay, so I'm going to hop from this fall assessment now to the spring assessment and go a little bit less deep on some of these. But I do want to take a look at the spring assessment for 1st grade, for example. And what we see here, I find quite encouraging. That is, now we're seeing a different kind of pattern. That is, okay, after those kids kind of broke out of the pandemic and now we're back into the classrooms, that we're seeing improvements across almost all of the questions on the mid-year. And I'm sure that you're curious about some of these. I always like to start with the ones that are easiest. And I'm going to put this one out here just because I find it interesting. There's a lot of people that wonder about number lines in the younger grades. And there are some who suggest that number lines should not be introduced in kindergarten and 1st grade. It turns out in this case that in fact number lines with all these additional all the tick marks here, as we call them, right, that in fact that's the easiest question on the entire assessment in 1st grade. So that's what this says to me, is that these students are capable of using number lines probably that are even more complex than this one. And I think about that in the context of that 4th grade assessment task that we just saw, where students were unable to put 1/3 and 2/3 onto a number line, and wondering how we can make those connections across those ideas for students as they grow through. This written task number 2 is unknowns in various positions, something that our first grade students seem to lack exposure to as they go through the grades. So that's, you'll see that, yeah, about fewer than well, it looks like it's about fewer than 40% of students, and very consistent year over year are doing that. So but just quickly, I'll show second grade to show you kind of a similar pattern here in the spring assessment. We got actually the count forward one in the spring assessment drops off, but and here in third grade, or question 3, reading these numerals, we're seeing a drop off, and then in other areas we're seeing progress. So kind of a mixed bag here coming out of the second grade results in terms of where we were before the pandemic and where we are now. And this might be just, once again, because we've got a much bigger cohort of students now taking this assessment. A lot of that could be just noise from that. But I do want to show now the third grade one in contrast to these. So third grade, spring assessment. Once again, these are those students who, for these students, the pandemic hit during the spring of their kindergarten year. And here we're seeing a drop off across every single one of the questions on the third grade spring assessment. What to make of that? I don't really know. Why? How? I'm not sure. I'll click on a few of these. This one took a pretty significant drop here in terms of being able to do a mental math problem of 300 minus 102. Pretty significant drop. This one here, a two-step word problem, pretty significant drop. So I'm really curious about why we're seeing these results, particularly here in third grade, whether this is a result of the pandemic, whether it's just luck of the draw, I don't really know. Any thoughts or reflections on that one that anyone wants to share? And look at this, we've gone from on that overall, and this assessment has not changed, mind you, over time. We went from 4.8 being in that most critical score to 8% in the heat of the pandemic, to now this year 13% being in that lowest group. We'll see whether this pattern holds up over time or whether we'll be able to make corrections on this next year. It's hard to say. And then there's that question of, state testing. I don't know. They did actually pause state testing in some places. So perhaps I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure, but it is, I think it's definitely interesting. And once again, I would encourage you, if you're a Forefront user already, to take a look at your own results and see if you're seeing similar patterns in your own schools. I think that would be a lot more helpful in terms of trying to interpret what might be driving the results that we're seeing here.
We do have a question about that last graph that you were sharing, David.
Yeah.
Just clarification about who is in each of those groups. Are those the same third graders, or are these third graders across the past 3 years?
So these are students who, okay, so these kids were in third grade 2 years ago. So these are now the kids that are in fifth grade. These are the kids who, well, last year, these are the kids who just completed fifth grade, I should say. These are the kids who just completed fourth grade, and these are the kids who just completed third grade. So these are with this kind of data, because this is third grade data, we're always going to have different groups of students. So you can never have a quote unquote matched cohort for students that are taking grade level assessments, right? The cohort is always going to be a new cohort. But we did bring in more cohorts this year. We brought in more students from a lot of different districts across the country that have come in. But mind you, these also are very similar groups, though, that we saw to the kindergarten and first grade results that we were just looking at. Generally, as districts adopt the universal screeners for number sense with Forefront, they adopted either K2 or K5, and there'll be some that do a 3-5 adoption, but that's the exception, not the norm. And so we're looking at apples to apples in terms of the districts that are contributing to these scores. So the fact that we didn't see these kinds of drops in scores in kindergarten and first grade and second grade, I think is interesting, because it's the same demographic groups, if you will, that we're seeing in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade. I hope that does that clarify? I hope. So we're never going to have a matched cohort with these kinds of graphs. I will show you some things that we can do to get matched cohorts. Similar here with the fourth grade spring. Not quite as dramatic as the third grade, but nevertheless drops. So the upper grade levels, we're seeing these drops. In the younger grade levels, we're seeing improvements. Why? How? Not sure. I mean, it's not a completely across the board. You can see in the overall, this last column is the overall results. That OS stands for overall score. You can see that there's that drop there. It's not consistent across all the tasks that we have drops. None of them really show improvements, but some of them stayed quite static, like this comparing of fractions question here. So I do want to make sure that I show a couple more things. Tamara, should we pause for any more questions before I kind of change gears here?
No, again, feel free to share your questions if you wish to direct it just to myself and to David, to share that with the hosts and panelists, and I'll answer those through chat. If you are comfortable having that message recorded on our recording and available to all the registrants today, then please do drop that into everyone, and so that everyone can also see and read your question also.
So I wanted to show this one here. This is a new report that we've just come out with. What I'm showing here are the third grade results for the fall assessment from the year that just ended, compared to the mid-year results from that same year that just ended. And what I'm going to show you here is that the growth one first. So we have a line chart. We can see these same results in a line chart. And actually, let me get rid of a couple of things here. I'm not sure why that's there.
I do have a wondering to share as you're doing that, David. We did have someone share with the group. Could it be that the drop off that you were sharing in fourth and third grade and some of the higher grades could be that it's due to having missed key foundational numeracy concepts in the earlier years during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hypothesis that resonates with me is that these kids might have lacked in some of those foundational ideas in terms of conceptual development and cognitive development from those early years. Absolutely, I think that's a possibility. So what we're looking at here, once again, is these third grade results from the fall to the mid-year, and you'll see that, holy smokes, it worked the way it was supposed to. That is that the assessment is intended to show growth in this way. That is that the fall results, if you're on grade level, if you will, on the fall results, then on grade level for the mid-year results is what you want, because the assessments themselves become more difficult. So this is actually kind of the growth line of adequate growth as we visualize it here within Forefront. But we like to point out that, once you average things together, that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing that you've always got. So if I put this into a side-by-side, what we can really see is that the group of students who were well below and below has shrunk from the time from the fall to the mid-year. And also that group of students that was proficient in the fall shrunk to the mid-year. So that's kind of interesting in terms of this thing. So it averages out to be flat, but it's not really identical. And then to see what's the flow here, if you will, from that fall to the mid-year, this is where we go into what we call a Sankey chart. And now we can see that there were some students who moved from the proficient to the basic, other students who moved from the basic to the proficient, and then those who just went basic to basic, et cetera, as you go through this. Down here on the chart below, I think this is also very interesting. of the students who were at the well below basic, 27 of them, 27 in our global cohort here, went from well below basic to well below basic, and there was no change. There was 13 of them that moved up. None of them made it all the way up to the proficient level. In contrast to that, or similarly perhaps, at the proficient level, those students who were proficient to proficient, we have that largest group that went from that. A smaller group fell down, and then only 3 of those students who were proficient at the beginning of the year performed at a below basic level at the mid-year. And so kind of not as much movement across these cohorts, and none of them fell all the way down to the well below, which, good news there, of course. Nevertheless, we're seeing more movement. This is the good news, from those well below up to these upper levels. More than half of them moved up to the below basic or the basic level of those who performed at the well below basic at the beginning of the year. So that's really what we want to see, and a pretty big chunk of students who went from below basic up to the basic level at the middle of the year. So good news there indeed. I'm going to go ahead and add in the additional one of the spring one, just so we can see that and compare it. So this is 3rd grade we're looking at, right? So if I put in the spring one as well, let me go ahead and turn off that. Now we can see that those results from the mid-year to the spring and the movement there, and quite similar, although we do see some kind of troubling lines of students, just a few of them who dropped way down from that mid-year all the way down to the well below basic. Only 1 student out of more than 1,000, but nevertheless, something that's kind of stands out as interesting there, an anomaly in the data, if you will. And then if you're interested, if you're a real data junkie, you can also get the stats on these things to see the correlation there, and we can see that you've got a correlation of 7.75, which is pretty robust in terms of that correlation from the mid-year to the spring in this case. Or you want to, you can see there's the fall to the mid-year 0.75 again, and the fall to the spring also 0.75. So very consistent in terms of those numbers. So we're about 45 minutes in here on this, and so I kind of want to make sure I hop back over here to my other slides.
I did just want to share, so I'm getting quite a few questions in chat.
Yeah.
So for those of our clients who have questions about this, you may have noticed that this is our new reporting suite, which is opt-in for the 2023-24 school year. We can turn that on for you now and save any of the reports that you're interested that you've seen today with you. So just feel free to reach out to myself or to David after our call today, and we're happy to share those reports with you. I do have a couple questions too that I think would be best answered. So is it fair to say that students who should get about the same number correct on each assessment if they are making typical progress? So now kind of rather than that overall performance view, kind of item by item, what does that look like?
Yeah, I don't, that's a good question. So item by item, what is it? Let me go back into that.
I feel like this is an it depends kind of.
It really does depend. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you want to think about is the fact that it's just not going to be consistent from student to student. They're all going to be unique, right? And so, yeah, I mean, the idea of the design of the assessments is intended to say that a student who is on track and just kind of performing at a static level, like growing, from one assessment to the next, that their line, and you can, on this line chart that I showed earlier, you can put at your district level, you can put individual students on this. So seeing that relative growth there relative to the global cohort, or rather relative to your local cohort, is a good way to think about relative growth for these students. Absolutely. And so, yeah, the intention is that we would have students that would be proficient and it would look like a flat line for them. What we really want is for those students who are down lower on this scale to see their line accelerate and to go up relative to the cohort for certain, right? Now, it is possible within within the new reporting suite to actually do a question by question analysis and kind of think about, okay, how are they doing on the counting tasks and how are they doing on the numeral identification tasks and things like that. And you can break it down to that level if you want to with the new reports. And I think that would be helpful for those students who are in interventions that are targeting those specific skills in particular. But in general, yes, we're looking at the design of the assessments is that growth at grade level on pace looks flat like this. Any other questions there, Tamara, that I should answer right now?
We do. I'm looking at the time. We have about 12 minutes left. So okay. I think we might revisit some of the questions that we have in chat at the end once we've.
Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and transition back to my other slide. So pardon me while I make this rather clunky kind of transition here. Yep. Cancel that. Dolly. And
I do have one that did come in that I'm happy to answer too. This was shared with everyone. Are all the students in the sample receiving the same intervention program during the year, or is there variation in the programs? So there's quite a bit of variation in terms of both the instructional program and the interventions that are in place in these school districts that are using these assessments. So that's a great observation to share too.
Yeah, this is not any kind of controlled study as such, where we would be able to measure the impacts of interventions. That we provide for you the tools to do that at a local level. If you're interested in doing that kind of thing, where you could say, okay, we have, you can compare to our global cohort the results of your students. And then you can see the relative growth of your students who you put into targeted interventions to see if you are able to beat the global, if you will, that if you are able to demonstrate more growth than we see in the global cohort, then that's definitely a possibility to do. But that's not the work that we are doing here. That's the work that we support you in doing at your district. So just a couple of the big takeaways here. I wanted to wrap up here. We have a rapidly growing global cohort, so this is becoming increasingly useful for the districts that we serve, and so happy to see that happening. And that's also helping us. The internal research that we do is assessment validation, assessment reliability, and these kinds of things in terms of just analysis of the qualities of the assessment itself. And so having that larger cohort allows us to do that kind of studies, and that's really helpful for us. And so we appreciate that. But that's so that rapidly growing cohort, that means that we have a much more stable kind of group to compare to, which is great. We are seeing overall improvements across all of the fall assessments. I think that is definitely a celebration that we want to make sure that we put out there. We are seeing more inconsistent results on the mid-year and spring screeners. And in fact, and most concerningly, that third grade spring USNS scores have dropped. We're not sure the cause on that. We don't know. We'll have to watch that in the future and see what happens on that. And then we just did, obviously, one of the takeaways that we're hoping that you got here is that we have new tools for visualizing and understanding results across all grades and across all assessments. And these same tools can be used to compare different assessments as well. So if you're using the screener assessments and you want to compare those to your curricular assessments or your state assessments, we provide for you the tools to do that as well. And I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that before we go away. Just a couple more slides here about some of the things that we offer here at Forefront. In addition to the software, we do offer professional development opportunities. One of probably the most popular of the offerings we offer right now is called the USNS Essentials. This provides an overview of the assessment, how to administer the assessment, how to score the assessment. to get that, all those questions answered and to get your implementation up and running and strong from the very, very beginning, or hopping on the second year. That's also possible. Later on, this is almost a follow-up, but doesn't have to be a follow-up. It can also be independent, is going over the results. So working with leaders and teachers in the districts that we serve to evaluate the results, consider the meaning of those results. What is it that we want to think about? And then use that information for instructional purposes. How do we design instructional responses to the evidence that we're collecting here, or any other assessment systems that you might be putting into place? We do have a couple of events that we want to make sure that we get out there and announce. We have an event in Chicago that's happening on August 10th. That will be specific to Forefront users. We're going to be going in depth with this new reporting suite that we've been showing off to you today, and really talking about how do you create those reports, how do you share those reports, how do you evaluate those reports, how do you prepare those reports for your work throughout the year. And then that'll be a really great networking opportunity as well for people who want to join us there on August 10th outside of Chicago. And then in Massachusetts in the fall, we are going to have two events back to back. One of them is for the Forefront users on October 20th, similar to what we're going to be doing in Chicago. And then on the 21st, we're going to have our first multi-district in-person Universal Screen District Number Sense event. That will be a full day event, thinking about in the morning the design of the assessments, understanding number sense as it's defined by the screeners, looking at how to administer and how to teach others to administer the assessments, how to score and how to teach others to score the assessments. And then in the afternoon, we will focus in on how to respond to the ideas and talk about instruction in the afternoon. So that's we're really looking forward to that October 21st in Worcester, Massachusetts. For all of those out in Massachusetts, I hope I said that right. Worcester.
Give us a thumbs up, because we've been practicing.
We've been working on that one, Worcester. So yeah, learn more about that on our learning page, if you will. And then I'm going to just open up for the last 5 minutes here. Any questions that we might want to wrap up with? Yeah.
Could we actually share the next page? We have gotten some questions about how you can both reach out to our team and kind of learn more either about the reporting tools that you've seen today, some of the learning opportunities too that David has shared. So our contact us page is on our website that has a phone number and emails that you can use to connect with us. I'm also sharing that email. I will be sharing out our recording link before the end of the day tomorrow, so you will have a recording of today's presentation in your inbox too, and you can also feel free to respond to that email if you have any follow-on questions. We do have a couple questions for the big group here. One is, what are your takeaways about which specific topics to prioritize for Tier 2 interventions? That's a pretty big topic, I think, to tackle in the last 4 minutes. So, Amy, if you could perhaps help us focus on a specific grade level, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking as well. I just, the evidence that we have, and we did a research study in collaboration with some people at Virginia Tech, Andy Norton and Jay Wilkins out there, and we looked specifically at those number word sequences, most in depth at number word sequences and counting, and the evidence was really strong and compelling that students need to have counting strategies down. They need to be able to not only know the number word sequence, but they need to apply that number word sequence in their counting strategies in contexts with and without materials to work with. If you have students that are in those grade levels that are not doing that, that is exactly where I would focus my attention. I mean, honestly, we want to do more research on this stuff and really be able to answer that question. But I just feel like there's a number of questions on the assessments as you move through the grade levels that really start to call out to me. The number lines on fractions in 4th grade is alarming to me. I really feel like, because we know, I mean, there's other research that goes back quite a ways that shows that fractions and students' ability to understand and demonstrate an understanding of fractions in the upper grades of elementary is highly predictive of their performance in middle schools. Now, I don't think that fractions hang out there on their own in some kind of weird world where they're separate from whole numbers. But I think that they are a very strong indicator of those students who are prepared for fractions and who are prepared for the more sophisticated thinking that needs to happen in middle schools. And so I would really look at those students in those areas in your district where you have troubles with fractions. I would really focus in there. But it is a very huge question that hopefully we'll be able to answer in further webinars down the road.
Thumbs down on the Worcester
Oh no.
pronunciation. It isn't Whoosh, it's Wuss. So
it is Worcester. I thought so. I thought Worcester.
You were right.
Worcester.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. We will get that right next time. Thank you.
One other clarification about the question that was asked earlier. It wasn't item by item results and how that would change, but if a student missed, 10 questions on the fall, should they also be, should we anticipate that they would again miss 10 questions on the middle of year assessment?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, so in that case, I mean, these look, the screeners are meant to be used in ways that make sense to the users, right? So if you've got a student who has completely bombed on the fall assessment, first of all, number one, I would go back and I would make sure that I did some further assessment with that child to find out where they do understand, where is the edge of their understanding of skills and concepts. That's first. And then what I would probably do then is to go back and retest with that fall screener, give them a reassessment of the fall screener to see if you have made progress relative to that screener itself, and whether they are now able to perform proficient on at least some of the skills and concepts on that fall assessment. Because if you're just below the board on everything, we're not measuring anything. If I call this the kind of the assessment that's like a high, like a high jump. If someone is trying to jump over a bar and they're unable to jump high enough to even hit the bar and knock it down, then we don't find out about really almost anything about that student. All they did is walk under the bar, right? So what you really need to try to do is to figure out where should the bar be set to find out when that student can jump over it. So I don't know that we would measure any progress if a child went from a 0 to a 0, if you will, right? I don't think that that's legitimate for a measure of progress.
Since we're at time, I would suggest, David, that we conclude. We'll stop the recording. We still have some questions in chat, so we will still take the time to answer those questions. Or just be respectful of everyone's time who's joined us today.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you to everyone. I don't know why I can't move my screen, but I'm going to move it over here. Well, now it's getting messy. So, yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, I will go ahead and I'll stop the recording now, and then we'll stay off the recording to continue answering questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.